Welcome to Literary Latte, the podcast with a Southern accent on writing. I'm Lynda Bouchard, and it's time for your jolt of literary inspiration. Just when I thought I was out, you pull me back in. In my last episode, you may recall I announced my hiatus from hosting this podcast because I'm writing a book of my own, and I needed time to do that. But I immediately received a boatload of requests begging me not to end my podcast. So this is how much I love you guys. I'm back, serving up your jolt of literary caffeine. Episodes for next season will roll out every other month and will be jam-packed with top-flight guests and the literary inspiration you've come to love. This is a bonus episode from the vault. It's my conversation with the award-winning poet Adrian Rice, and it's one of my favorites. I went back and listened to it again, and I'd forgotten how much fun it was talking with Adrian. He shares some really important points about writing and poetry in particular. Plus, I could listen to his accent all day long. I mean, come on. Since this interview, Adrian has published a new collection of poems titled The Strange Estate, New and Selected Poems. It's also interesting to see what's changed and what hasn't changed on this podcast. You'll notice the music and intro have changed, but the underlying principle that writing is hard work and takes commitment is the through line of every episode. As a side note, Adrian and I will be faculty workshop leaders at the High Road Festival of Poetry and Short Fiction in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the weekend of March 27th, 2020. This is one of the best literary festivals in the South. Adrian will lead a poetry seminar, and I'll be there sharing my unique publicity and marketing tips during a fun-filled workshop that will help you rise above the competition. So be sure and sign up today. Seating is limited. Come on out and meet Adrian in person. You'll get to listen to that sublime accent as you learn from one of the finest contemporary poets. I'll have the link in the show notes where you can register. Or you can go to Press 53, that's press53.com for more information. So without further ado, here's my interview with Adrian Rice. Perhaps nothing puts a focus on language more than poetry, the economy of it, the mystery, the way it can change your life, as my guest today will share with us. With me is the esteemed Irish poet Adrian Rice, who has become a modern-day landbreaker of poetic territories. His poetry is infused with memories of Northern Ireland and observations of Appalachia and the Low Country. Adrian will share the backstory of his poetic journey, one that brought him to Hickory, North Carolina, and he'll shine a spotlight on the importance of poetry in our world today. His recent collection of poems titled Hickory Station is published by Press 53 and has garnered the praise of the late Nobel Prize winning writer Seamus Heaney, among many others. He also has a cool backstory about Van Morrison, which I simply can't wait to hear, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you in, Adrian.
It's wonderful to be with you, Lynda. You sang great.
Well,
and whoever that was you were talking about sounds pretty cool too.
Well, that's you, my friend, and your accent is on poetry. And I've got to tell you that reading your work in your sublime book, Hickory Station, just transported me, Adrian, across the pond to your beloved Ireland, and then back again to the Piedmont area of the Carolinas. And there's a universal nature in your work, and where you create a little room within a world. And so let's talk about why poetry for you? Why is that your medium? And also how place informs your writing.
Well, poetry to start with, Lynda, it's really due to a teacher, that I met when I was 14, 15, a school called Ballyclare High School. Out in the country a little bit, from Belfast. And he was an extraordinary man, a man called Samuel Thompson, or everybody in the school called him Sammy T. And he literally just changed my life by coming into the classroom on the first day that we got him and reciting John Keats's Ode to a Nightingale from memory. And the whole class, including myself, who was a bit of a bad boy at the time, we were determined that we were going to make fun of this man for a couple of years in English class. And, he certainly looked as if you could make fun of him. But whatever that thing was, I remember turning to my friend, Martin Beatty, who sat beside me, and just saying, "What was that?" And he looked at me kind of and said, "I think he said it was a poem." And I just knew from that moment that there was something in that, the rhythms of those words and what was being said by them. I didn't understand them all. I didn't get the poem, as it were, straight away. But there was something about it that just captured me. And, I was really just, from then on, poetry has always figured for me. And then place, Lynda, you come from Ireland. It's a beautiful island. You come from the north of Ireland. Everybody knows everybody else in a certain way. And place is very, very important. And it's such an ancient land and such great literature and mythology about it. And, we were kind of close-knit. Even if you were urban, you were close-knit just as much as, rural communities. So place is huge for Irish poets, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. And there's a magic to it, poetry. It uses the common currency of our daily speech and words that are known to us, but in a sequence that kind of surprises us and out of our normal rhythms.
Yeah, it's kind of, like, as Frost, or, it's memorable speech and whatever. I think, I always say that my grandmother, my mother's still with us, back home, but my grandmother obviously has gone quite a while. But, I would really put my love of words and storytelling probably down to people like that, because they weren't women that went to college or anything like that, and were essentially country women. But, I just remember the talking, the jokes, the stories, the gossip, there was a real rhythm to it. And I could just literally quietly, while playing as a kid or whatever, I know I was soaking all of that in. And, the banter between my uncles, I had several uncles and aunts and, people like that. There was just such a humour and a natural storytelling quality to what they were saying that I think really affected me. And then poetry, I always suspected poets are kind of maybe lazy on a certain front because we go for the shortest format of writing. But I think it is more, Joseph Brodsky said, the poets are more like the kind of the aircraft. They're not the big tanks and the foot soldiers of novels, or the kind of the boats or the aircraft carriers of short stories and novels. But they're more like the air power, the ones that are flying under the radar and hitting targets very precisely.
Oh, that's a wonderful analogy. But I don't think that poets are lazy at all, because it takes I'm sure you agree with this, Adrian, that it's harder to write short. It's like Mark Twain said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say that too, and obviously, if anybody, especially my wife's listening, I could never actually admit to being lazy in any way, let's be honest, But no, you're you're right. I mean, trying to say something as significant as you can, or maybe hoping that something's worthy for other people to share, and to say the maximum amount and generally the shortest space possible. Yeah, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, not just little moments of inspiration that go into that. No doubt about it. I agree. Okay, I agree.
No, I never hear that. Nobody.
Well, you're hearing it today.
Thank you, Adrian.
Well, I must say, but Lynda, whenever I started at the poetry, the strangest state of poetry, the poetry game, you know, my early poems came out much slower than they do now. You know, I would have really reworked several times over one poem, fretted over it, and built it very slowly, brick by brick, sort of thing. I don't know whether it's, you know, getting a bit older or living over here or time of life, whatever it is, but I find that there's, you know, in a strange way, much more of inspiration about it now, rather than the gut-wrenching work that I have done. But I'll probably just curse myself now, you know. But I have noticed that, you know.
Okay, and what would you attribute that to? Because I know you write in a very special place, and share that with us. And does that have something to do with the freedom you're feeling with your writing life?
I think, you know, definitely over here, living in Hickory and in the little house that we rent from our friends and neighbours, Lamar and Chris Ann, you know, there's a little porch here at the front, just on a little quiet kind of suburban road, little, you know, humble avenue. And it kind of has everything, Lynda, you know, you're kind of hidden enough on the little porch, and you're private enough, but you're also open to enough of the world, with, you know, shrubs and trees and the white picket fences and the odd person walking by with the dog giving you a wave, or, you know, you can see the storms coming in, the rain, you see all the bird life. You've got enough of the world, I've discovered, it's enough of a window on the world to give you as many poems as you're kind of fit to receive. And so that's become a strange, open-aired, semi-hidden little portal for me in a way. It's very, very odd. But I do think it's not just the setting. I think it is something to do with, you know, getting older, having something maybe to say, being away from your homeland. So your thoughts when you're sitting on the porch inevitably at times turn every evening that you're there, you know, to what you've come from and what you've in some sense left behind and who you've left behind, and all those memories flood in, you know, and the kind of differences between here and there are always constantly before your eyes, you know, even if it's something as simple as, you know, you find yourself innocently looking at robins in the garden, and then, you know, even just to look at them, you go, my goodness, they're so much bigger than the ones back home. You know, even just a simple thought like that can start a poem, you know. So, right. You know, there's something to do with that, you know, and it's the old story. I used to think it was a terrible cliche that, you know, a lot of people had to, you know, a la James Joyce or whatever, you know, go away from their homeland, go away from Ireland, for example, to actually then turn your attention to writing about it. And I thought that was just a cliche, but I have to say it's become a reality for me that the distance has given you that urge or inclination or inspiration to actually focus on your memories of home much, much more than I might have done even if I'd have stayed at home the whole time.
Yes, I understand that, and I see that in your writing. You can see the inner promptings of the imagination, and paying attention, as you said, to the world around you is so important.
You know, Raymond Carver is one of my heroes over here. You know, as you know, we lost him years ago, but the great short story writer and poet Raymond Carver is just a legend to me. And he's a short little essay called On Writing. And everybody, you know, poet, novelist, whatever you are, should read it. Just a short little, I think it's 4 pages basically. But, you know, in that he just he makes the point a couple of times that a writer just has to be kind of almost dumb enough to be able to just sit and stare at something long enough, you know, and that's really what I find on the porch. You know, I sit there and literally I don't use cell phones or whatever. I'm addicted enough to screens, you know, internally with laptop or whatever. But, you know, because you don't have a cell phone on you, a smartphone, whatever, I'm not interrupted out there. And if you just sit, you know, and I determine not to get poems. I want to sit and read and relax. But inevitably, you know, it has happened so often, you know, but I think it is just quiet attention. And it's also that kind of, that word disinterested. You're disinterested enough. You're not sitting going, right, I need to get a poem. Or what am I looking at? Let's examine everything really carefully. There's a kind of a disinterestedness involved, which goes back to that Coleridge and Keatsian ideas, you know, of the disinterested imagination. That you just allow yourself to, I guess, become more, I don't know, this sounds weird, but become more mind and body in a strange way. You're just allowing your mind to take in what's there, and it's going to sieve it. And if there's a little nugget of something, you know, it's going to be there for you to look at.
Yes, I understand that. And as you say, poetry has that beautiful ability to distill the language down to its essence. And poetry has its roots in the oral tradition and is read aloud more than any other form of writing. And that's where the magic happens. And I would love for you, Adrian, to read your beautiful poem, Breath, for us, because there is an inner urgency and emotional candor in that just resonated with me. It's like the tension between the withheld and the revealed. And please read
and that poem
that.
Actually, Lynda, you know, that's an example of, I mean, I got that poem basically verbatim. I think I changed 2 words, you know, I went out one night onto the little porch, and my wife, Molly, who's also a poet, is used to me going out there. And, you know, within an hour or something, maybe I'll come in, she'll see me disappear upstairs to the study, and she'll know that I'm typing up something I've got, and then I go back out with a typed up sheet and start correcting it. And, you know, she's used to that. And, but that particular night I went out, and within about 5 minutes I was back in, and I remember her saying, you can't have got a poem. And I said, well, I think I might have got one of my best poems. She went, what? And I went upstairs and typed it, but she knows it came from many years before. We went to, of all places, Walmart. She picked me up from the community college I was teaching in, and we went to get bread and milk kind of later at night, you know, not too late, but, you know, middle of the evening. And there was a lovely couple who, you know, were definitely not flushed with money, and had a couple of kids, and they were trying to talk the parents into buying big, fancy, expensive helium balloons for a birthday party. And I kind of helped the guy talk them into buying the cheap, old-fashioned blow-up balloons. You know, and he joked that with the kids that, you know, your daddy had a big red face and he would look stupid and he'd be talking with a squeaky voice and all of that. And the kids went for it. And he kind of thanked me for talking them into it, you know, and I just turned to Molly and said, there's a poem in that somewhere. And that was years ago. And then just that one night I went out, sat on the porch, and literally the first little 3 lines, the opening verse, came into my head. I wrote them down in my notebook, and then the whole poem just flowed out. It was a very bizarre but wonderful little experience, you know. Here it is. It's called Breath. What is death but a letting go of breath? One of the last things he did was to blow up the children's balloons for the birthday party, joking and mock cursing as he struggled to tie all those footery teats. Then he flicked them into the air for the children to fight over. Some of them survived the party and were still there after the funeral, in every room of the house, bobbing around mockingly in the least draught. She thought about murdering them with her sharpest knife, each loud pop an angry bullet from her heart. Instead, in the quietness that followed her children's sleep, she patiently gathered them all up, slowly undoing each raggedy nipple, and one by one she took his last breaths into her mouth. What is life but a drawing in of breath?
Wow. That is just so beautiful. And if you're just joining us, I am with the esteemed Irish poet Adrian Rice, and he is reading some poetry from his latest book, Hickory Station. That is so beautiful. The fact that you put it together so quickly is amazing.
Yeah, very, very odd, which is, it's always given. And the longer I go on at this, I was saying to my classes the other day up at Appalachian that, when poets are they publish a new book or they get a poem in a prestigious magazine or something, we used to joke back home that don't believe a poet who says they don't actually sleep with it under the pillow, because they all do. They're like little kids. They're excited and humbled and grateful that somebody is actually responding to their work. Mm-hmm. And, it's the same way with individual poems on their own. If you don't end up thinking that somebody's walked up and handed them to you, then from my point of view, there's something wrong. I always like to sit and gaze at stuff that comes out, if it's any good at all, or people think it's any good at all. It's just somebody's gifted it to you. It's a very, very odd feeling, and that one was a peculiar gift, Reminds me of Yeats's line, if it doesn't seem like a moment's thought, or stitching and unstitching has been not. So there's always that wonderful givenness about the finished, successful poem. It seems as if it's just so easy.
Yes, but there's thought and hard work behind it.
Yeah, but it's odd, you can't kill. I almost just, the older I get, I'm starting to worry about claiming credit for any of it. But that's a whole other conversation maybe, but anyway.
Yeah, that's part of the creative process and the creative mind, because the process of writing is a process of self-discovery, and you know that better than anyone. And I would love to segue a little bit, Adrian, into the fact that Bob Dylan, who is a songwriter, and I believe that songwriters are our modern day poets, and you play in a band. And so I think Bob Dylan proved it, that he is a modern day poet when he redefined literature's boundaries in winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it just shows the significance of a generation, of the collective memory, and of the oral tradition, and in the way that Dylan sustains literature through his writing, the metaphor, the memory, all at once.
Yeah, he's one of my heroes, Dylan would be huge, right from the very beginning. Certainly one of your favorite musicians, singer-songwriters, but you've always been aware that with Dylan it was more than that. If you are going to go back to the little cliche we used from Frost, that poetry being memorable speech, then it's very hard to argue against the memorability of so many of Bob Dylan's lyrics, and especially individual lines, and how important certain lyrics were at different parts of even American history, world history, So I wouldn't argue against it at all. I do see where some of the purists, Lynda, when so many straightforward, if you like, poets and straightforward novelists and straightforward playwrights, who don't get the Nobel Prize every year, I can see the argument that there's maybe a special Nobel character, a little place for somebody like Dylan, but in the end, I have no problem with him getting it. Extraordinary body of work, and not just in his lyrics, but some of the prose he's written and all the rest of it, and a huge influence on people like me growing up in Belfast, like during the Troubles, whatever, those protest songs and just the wisdom. But I mean, I have to include people like Leonard Cohen with them. I actually explore Leonard Cohen.
Me too.
Yeah, and I mean, and he's branched out into poetry much more obviously by publishing literal poetry books, more than one, you know what I mean? But I'm not going to argue about Dylan. He deserves everything he gets, in my view.
Okay, great. Because, I was wondering when he won that, I was like really over the moon about it because I thought it was so avant-garde a choice. But I just like you enjoy the poetry of his lyrics. And I just wondered if writers were going, what? If they were up in arms about it, but apparently...
I wrote several lyrics. I've written a lyric with a friend in the Belfast Boys I play with, Alyn. We did a tribute to the great Irish Belfast soccer player George Best, a song called The Conjure, which we were proud of. And I've written other lyrics with a Belfast guy called Jimmy Brown. And, it was a fascinating process for me to do that. It was different to writing poems, and it made me realize that a lot of lyrics, I'm sure even Dylan's lyrics, can seem very flat on the page, but once the music is put to them or the tune is put to them, they become more than alive. There's an added beautiful synergy going on there. So I was very aware of that. I tried to make my own lyrics as poetical as possible, whatever that is. We can argue about that all day, but I did realize that, you've opened, even the great Van Morrison has published a book recently, Lit Up, I think it's called, with Faber and Faber of his lyrics. And, arguably, some of those just don't come across as poems, without the music. But when you hear the music in your head linked to the lines, then, it becomes more than poetry in a way. It's just beautiful lyricism of the purest kind, added to the music. So there's a whole debate there, Lynda, that I guess you've kind of got so much to think about that it's one of those ones that I pay attention to on social media or something, and then just kind of quickly move on and get back to my own poetry and that sort of thing. You know what I mean? Sure,
absolutely. And since you brought up Van Morrison, I cannot let you go without you sharing that story and what the heck happened there.
Yeah, I've only met Van Morrison in person once properly, and that was, when I started, I did a thing called the Muck Island Box with the artist Ross Wilson, a great friend of mine, and he basically forced me into writing poetry. I'd fallen in love with it at 14, but I didn't write my first proper poem until 1986, so it was kind of through him telling me I was a poet, and that I just hadn't bothered to do it yet. But Morrison came, we launched that, we made 100 boxes. It's a long story. The Tate Gallery, Boston Museum of Fine Arts, they bought this box and kind of launched as a poet from nowhere back home. And we were handing the boxes out to all these wonderful subscribers that had paid in advance to help us make this thing, 12 poems and 12 images and limited edition. And we got the great Davy Hammond agreed to come and give a little speech for us, and a lot of the Belfast, Dublin poets turned up, and Alton turned up, this amazing, making its name band, traditional Irish. But it was just an amazing night, and then Van Morrison showed up and asked to be introduced to us, which was just extraordinary. But I hadn't seen him from that, which is back in 1990, and then I was home doing the Irish version of The Clock Flower, which Press 53 reissued a year later, but the Irish version, we were launching it back home, and through, his PA and whatever, we were invited to, at short notice, towards the end of our trip home, we were invited at short notice by him to go to his house for dinner, Molly, Micah, and myself. And I opened the email, late at night, early morning, in my daughter's house, and I turned to my wife, Molly, and just said, "Oh my goodness, you'll not believe this." And our little boy had been very ill back home and everything during our trip and had to be hospitalized, and she just looked at me and said, "What now?" And I said, no, it's really, really wonderful news, but it's terrible too. And she went, what do you mean? And then I showed her the email, and she burst out laughing, but the two of us looked at each other and just went, it could only happen to me. But we'd had this wonderful booking already arranged to go down to Barons Court Estate to read for our friend, the Duchess of Abercorn. I know it sounds bizarre, but Sasha Abercorn, a direct descendant of Alexander Pushkin, and just an extraordinary woman, and, has done an amazing thing back home with the Pushkin Trust for 30 years. It's a long story, peace and the arts, but she brought me down for this select kind of audience to read at Barons Court Estate just before we were coming home back to Hickory, and it was all arranged. You couldn't rearrange it. And I had to write Morrison back and just say, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I can't take your offer of going for dinner as I've got to Abercorn.
Oh.
Just bizarre, so there you go, but what the Irish are like. There'll be so many people then, for goodness sake, who cares about Van anyway? Do your own thing, and they love to knock our famous people down. So lots would be going, that's terrible. Others would be going, who cares? It's only me, Van. I thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you still knock that one around.
Why did you bring it up? Why did you bring it up?
I'm sorry. Curiosity. I just had to know. And Adrian, we are going to end on that high note because this has gone so quickly. Thank you so much, Adrian, for taking us on your magic carpet ride of poetry. But you know what? I think you could read the phone book and make it sound like poetry, okay?
I did read a menu up in the mountains once because I was asked to, but that's another story for another time.
Oh, we will have you back when your next work is published. Adrian's work is published by Press 53, and it can be found at your favorite booksellers and online. And to find more about Adrian or where you can catch his band performing, go to my website, bookingauthorsinc.com, where I'll post all of this great information. Adrian, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Lynda, so much. Lovely talking to you.
You've been listening to Literary Latte with Lynda Bouchard. For more information, visit bookingauthorsinc.com.